Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Hoops with Noel. I'm Blake. We got Vish and obviously Nolan here, ready to talk some basketball. Mainly the award predictions for the NBA awards, including Most Improved, MVP, Defense Player of the Year. We're only doing All NBA First Team and then All NBA Defensive First Team, just to don't want to go on too long with all the other ones. A lot of overlap with those, but we can get started with this. So, the most improved player for the NBA. I'm going to kick it to you first, Nolan. Who do you think is the NBA's most improved player?
I would say this year there's a bit more of more agreement on this, or there should be. I think there's a clear most improved player, and I think he's going on them arguably the breakout team of the year, the New York Knicks, and I'm going with Julius Randle. And I think the one stat that stuck out to me the most is just the fact that from last year to this year, he's gone from 27% from behind the arc to 41% from three this year, which is crazy. And that's the stat that caught out to me the most, and I think that's the player that I'm going with. What about you, boys?
Yeah, I also am going with Julius Randle. Like you said, there shouldn't be a lot of disagreement with this one. It is Julius Randle all the way. I mean, nobody thought the New York Knicks would be in the playoffs, let alone 8 games above 500 and the 4 seed at this point in the season. They're obviously playing great basketball, and Julius Randle is the main reason why they are. I mean, you go down the numbers, and you talked about the – did you guys lose me there for a second?
Nope.
Okay, so you go down the numbers and you talked about the 40% from three, right? That's a massive, massive improvement, especially for a power forward that is shooting, 5 threes a game. So he upped his attempts and his percentage improved. That's incredible. What really gets me is the fact that Julius Randle's averaging 5 assists a game this year. And if you watch the New York Knicks play basketball, he's actually like kind of a mini Nikola Jokic, Giannis type, where he's a big that handles the ball and distributes the ball for them. He's been unbelievable this season. Some people have him in the MVP discussion, which I think is a little rich, but he's been awesome. He was a deserved all-star, and he's without a doubt the most improved player in today's NBA.
Yeah, so I think that's the consensus here. You look at like Vegas betting sites, and they're all in on him too. But I did want to say in the very beginning of the year, it did look like it was going to be Christian Wood. Just from the very get-go, then injuries, and I mean the Rockets lost over like 15 games in a row, and they were just, obviously collapsed from what they didn't really even have. Was a great start, but yeah, as you guys mentioned, the threes, and I did want to point out, Nolan. So you said 27 to, it was 41%. His threes, Vish, you mentioned that they went up, but how much up? He went from 3.6 to 5.4. That's 1.5 times more 3-pointers a game he was taking, which is just that type of growth is like just absolutely insane from one off season to the next. You usually either the percent would stay the same or the attempts would stay the same, but both of those increasing drastically is like actually just wild. So props to him. Minutes has gone up. He's averaged 5 more minutes a game. He's played the most minutes out of any player, averages the most. Now, some would say that's because Tom Thibodeau just loves playing his starters, and there is a little truth to that, I would say. But I think it's just impressive that he's been such an Iron Man and actually able to like play all the games and play a lot of minutes. That's averaging a little over 9 minutes every quarter. So that's insanely impressive. And Vish, the assist, obviously improved a lot, showing he's a much better playmaker. So really every aspect of his game has improved, and he's taken that step to be like the face of the franchise for the New York Knicks, which they really haven't had since, I'd say, Melo, and that was a little while ago. So props to them, and I'm really happy that the Knicks are getting back to being sort of this mainstream team that people talk about and are making the playoffs.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah, I would agree too. And I would just add that like another thing going along with that I don't think can be understated is Randle's gone from last year this year with still scoring the most, but then getting them the record that they have now and then giving them hope. I feel like Randle's there's obviously a deep team on that roster, but he really has been the man day in, day out. And that gives all the other players on that team more of a chance to like show themselves in big moments and just lift that team up. and I just love what's going on. I just love the culture of the Knicks too, and I think Randle's a huge part of that. And it can't be understated what he's really done to turn around the franchise from last year to this year.
Certainly. So I think that wraps up the NBA's most improved player. So we all agree Julius Randle of the New York Knicks is the clear-cut favorite. Maybe some other guys like Christian Wood would have been there earlier in the year, but
maybe Kevin Porter Jr.
Yeah, that's a good name too as well to put in there. But yeah, Julius Randle is the bottom line winner in our eyes. Next, we can move on to MVP of the NBA. Now, I can't remember a year where this has changed between like 5 different guys or changed every week as much as it has this year. You know, in the past, it's been, it's definitely Steph Curry. It's definitely Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's definitely LeBron. This year, it has been, I feel like all those guys' names have been thrown in there and more. I'm going to start with Nolan on this one again. Nolan, who do you think's the MVP of the NBA?
So, yes, this has definitely been a crazy year for MVP considerations, given everything that's going on. I think, and we talked about this in other videos, to me, it was always the battle of the big men with Jokic and Embiid, who have both been unreal this year. And I think depending on how you look at the injury situation, I think regardless how you look at it, it gives Jokic an edge. And I just think his day in, day out performance, along with the fact of Jamal Murray going down and the Nuggets still being a very playoff potential team in terms of the rankings, gives him the edge. So I'm going with Jokic, but I'm curious your guys' thoughts on the race.
Yeah. So, Blake, you brought up how it's not this year like a definitive guy. I'm wondering why there's not a definitive guy. To me, Nikola Jokic is the definitive MVP. Like, sure, you can make an argument for Steph, but his team is the 8th seed. He does not deserve the MVP when your team's the 8th seed. I'm sorry. Like, James Harden didn't even get it when he averaged 37 a game and his team was the 4th seed. Like, the Denver Nuggets are a good basketball team, but without Jeremy Grant, I would say that they've lost a little bit now. They've added Aaron Gordon, and they've tried to remake this team, but the talent around Jokic, I wouldn't say is excessive. They're 13-7 without Jamal Murray. And then the numbers he's putting up, like, I don't think people are stomaching the numbers that he's putting up as a center. He's 26, 10, and essentially 8.5 assists. That is ridiculous in and of itself. But then you look at the efficiency stats. He's 57% from the floor. He's 40% from 3, and he's 87% from the free throw line. What Nikola Jokic has been doing this year is beyond ridiculous. And then you go and you take it into the fact that he's played just about every game. He's been an Iron Man from that standpoint. And he's got the Denver Nuggets right there on the precipice of essentially being the 3 seed in the West with Jamal Murray not playing 20 games and with the supporting cast around him being very inconsistent. I think that this is a no-brainer. Like, respect to Steph, respect to the other guys, that Chris Paul, the other guys, Embiid. But to me, Nikola Jokic is a clear ahead above the rest.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think the Jamal Murray point really drives it home. They missed their second best player. He's just done for the season. You think there'd be somewhat of a fall off, like, they're missing him. He's their second best player, great scorer, obviously. They're 13-7 without him. I mean, that winning percentage is 65%. So you look at that and you're like, okay, that's really, really good. Who's the main factor? Like, are other guys stepping up? And I would say, yeah, MPJ has definitely stepped up more recently this year. But it's really been Jokic. And as you mentioned, Vish, like, what he's doing as a center is kind of dumbfounding, almost averaging a triple-double. His playmaking is of the best of the best. I mean, he's easily top 3 in that regard in my mind. And just the whole offense runs through him. And I guess what I do when I look at MVP is I say, if you took this guy off their team and left all the other pieces around, how good would that team be? And I think this team would probably be a bottom 5 team. Considering Jamal Murray's gone as well, and their best players are Aaron Gordon and MPJ. Now, those dudes are pretty good, but running a team, no shot. They wouldn't really have any good playmakers. I think they would have the most to lose from losing Jokic. I mean, especially what hurts Embiid is the fact that when they lost Embiid, they were still winning games, and that really, in my mind, says, okay, is he as valuable as we think he is? And other teams, I think you can make a case for guys missing games and such, but I mean, Embiid's or sorry, not Embiid. Jokic has been there for everything. He's been the main reason the Nuggets have won games. And I think without him, they would really not be a good team at all. And that, to me, is the marker for that's why he's the MVP.
Yeah, I agree with that. And real quick, you brought up Embiid, right? For me, Embiid would be right there in the conversation if he hadn't played. He's only played 49 games. He's going to end up playing like 5/7 of the game this season. Like the MVP award has never been given to players like that. And I think Nikola Jokic has also just been a bit better than Joel Embiid, as good as Joel Embiid has been. And then the other thing I want to touch on, and Nolan, I know you can elaborate on this a little more, is that people look at Nikola Jokic as just a one-way player, and he's been looked at that in the past. But I think one of the biggest revelations with Nikola Jokic, and it started with the bubble when he lost all that weight, is that he's become quite competent on the defensive end. He doesn't take stupid fouls. He is okay at shot contesting. He's never going to be confused for being Rudy Gobert or Joel Embiid or that kind of a defender or Jakob Poeltl, but he's a solid defensive center now, which is a really good thing for the Denver Nuggets. And Nolan, I know you have a lot more to say on this, so I'll give you the floor and let you talk about Nikola Jokic's improved defense.
Yeah. So, right, what Vish was saying, it's an interesting thing because Jokic will always be known for his playmaking, but he really has become a competent defender. And something I saw that really backed that up is there was a video that broke down a lot of times big men get criticized for how they ISO ball on guards. They're switched off the pick and roll. And a lot of guys can't really hang with really elite ball handlers. So it was interesting. There's a video that broke down the statistics behind a guard isolating on a big man and the percentage if it led to a shot or what it led to. And Gobert was number one in terms of the lowest percentage of a shot going in. And number two was Nikola Jokic, which I thought was very surprising because, as Vish was saying, people don't consider him to be really anything on the defense because of how amazing his offense is. But I think more can be said on his defense. And I think another reason that people don't really talk about it is that he's almost got that Kawhi-esque thing where he's so zoned in. He doesn't have that much emotion when he's like playing defense, and it just kind of like comes almost like easier to him. But I think that can also come in the sense that he is a very smart player and he really knows what he's doing on both ends of the ball.
That's a great point. So yeah, Nikola Jokic MVP. Any year we're at the beginning and went from Bron, there was Embiid, Steph Curry's been in the
Luka Doncic has been in the conversation too.
Luka Doncic was talked about a lot.
CP3,
tons of names, more than I feel like most years. But Nikola Jokic.
To me, also start to finish, it's kind of should have been Nikola Jokic. I don't know why every time it looks like it's him, we need to have a conversation about another guy. Like, a lot of people are having really great seasons, but I think it's time we actually give props to Nikola Jokic, who's a center who handles the ball for his team and is averaging 26, 10, and 8.5. Like, these numbers are ridiculous.
Wait, Campazzo's the point guard, Vish. Come on now. We know that. Campazzo's the main playmaker. All right, only kidding on that. But yeah, no, Jokic, awesome. Moving on now. Defensive Player of the Year in the NBA. Definitely a few bigger names. I don't think everyone's going to agree on this. The other two topics were a little more, most people agree. But this one, there's a few names that are kind of at the top. Nolan, who do you have as Defensive Player of the Year?
So my Defensive Player of the Year, I'd say this is definitely closer than the other two categories, and there's a lot of guys you could probably make good arguments for. My guy is going to be the Frenchman, Gobert. I think what he's been doing on the defensive side of the ball, being the anchor of that Jazz team, cannot be understated in the fact that they have the best record in the entire league. And I think the biggest hate with Gobert is he definitely got caught a couple of times with the ISO ball that we were talking earlier, looking like a fool. It's happened a couple of times, but we could also see, in my little rationale against that, is we see other players have been caught in that. I've seen one of my favorite defenders of all time is Chris Paul, CP3, and he's even been caught in the mixer with Steph Curry. So when you get elite ball handlers, people are going to be caught in the mixer. It's going to happen sometimes, and maybe we can link this video in the description or something like that. But the video I was talking about earlier, it broke down every single Rudy Gobert ISO ball possession. There's been 31 this year, and it broke down the stats around that. And he had it, regardless of the guy even scored, he had a 31% block percentage. He blocked 9 out of 31 attempts. I think that's pretty legit. So Gobert is my defensive player of the year, and then that is my rationale against him guarding guards.
Vish, who do you got?
Yeah, so I got Ben Simmons, but I don't. First of all, I do think Gobert is going to end up winning the award, which is his third defensive player of the year, and I think he's deserving. I think it goes beyond just the incredible blocks per game, and Nolan talked about how he's not actually as bad as people seem to perceive he is in terms of switching out onto guards. I mean, if you watch a Utah Jazz game and you know what you're watching, it's really hard to miss the impact of how many times players pass up what are seemingly open layups because the presence of Rudy Gobert makes them not want to put up the shot. He's become slightly better on the offensive end, but obviously this is a defensive conversation. He's unbelievable. But to me, it's Ben Simmons all the way. And the reason I have Ben Simmons, even though all defensive metrics favor Rudy Gobert, and I would say the eye test probably has them right there neck and neck, is because in the modern NBA, I'm just taking the elite perimeter defender over the elite big man. No disrespect to Gobert, but Ben Simmons' versatility to me on the defensive end changes things for the Philadelphia 76ers. The fact that no matter what, if they play Boston in the first round, he can guard Jason Tatum. If they play Milwaukee in the second round, he can guard Giannis. If they play the Nets in the Eastern Conference Finals, he can guard KD, he can guard Kyrie, he can guard Harden. And I think that level of versatility makes him unique. I mean, he has the strength to guard a Giannis. He's quick enough to guard a Kyrie or a Bradley Beal or a player like that. And then he's long enough to contest a guy like, again, Giannis or KD. And I think that combination is unique. I think he's the best defensive player in the NBA. No disrespect to Gobert, who's obviously right there. And Gobert, when it's all said and done, the rate he's going, he might be in the conversation for the best 4 or 5 defensive players in the history of basketball. That's how good Gobert has been the last 4 or 5 years. But I'm going to go with Ben Simmons. I think it's time he gets his respect. I actually thought Ben Simmons was the best defensive player in basketball last year when Philly was maybe not as good. And, Giannis ended up winning. And Anthony Davis, obviously, was incredible too. But I think this is the year Ben Simmons deserves his props. And again, it just goes back to the fact that I prefer that elite perimeter defender over the elite big man defender.
Yeah, so I want to say both of these guys are in my top 2, but the third guy I want to throw in there was Draymond Green, who I think needs to get talked about more. I want to say he's won it in the past, or he's been in that.
He's won it once.
Yeah, he has won. Okay. And he's been in the conversation, him and Rudy going back and forth. With him, team defense, like no matter who's out there, I feel like the Warriors defense is good, and he's the main reason for that. And then Nolan, Rudy Gobert, obviously, like interior defense is the best in the league. No complaints here. The guard stat you mentioned was interesting because one of my gripes about him was I feel like every time the Rockets would play the Jazz, James Harden would kind of take his lunch money and he would just kill him in the pick and roll. But obviously it's a regular season award, so that doesn't matter. But here's my thing and why I think it's Ben Simmons. And I think Vish mentioned it, but I wanted to expand a little bit. But he can guard 1 to 5, and he's an elite perimeter defender. But I'd also argue saying he's elite in the post too. I mean, if he was on a 5, it wouldn't be the most ideal, and I sure wouldn't want him to go against someone like Jokic every play, but he could hold his own against pretty much any 5 in the league. And then 1 through 4, I'd say he's locking down or at least keeping in check any of those guys. And when you do get to the playoffs, the league's going to be run by teams that have the best wings, Clippers, Lakers, Nets. I mean, they have good everything, but anyways. And then the Bucks, Celtics were mentioned as well. So the fact that Ben Simmons can guard any of the best guy on any team really well is why I like him a lot. And I did want to say one of the games against the Mavericks, he actually kind of put the clamps down on Luka Doncic. So shout out to him for that. And not many people have been able to do that. So I got Ben Simmons as my guy. I think this is going to be really close though. I feel like the defense player of the year is always, usually pretty close. There's a couple guys that are in there consistently.
Because I think the thing with the defensive player of the year is that it's all eye test. and like everybody only watches their favorite guy because it's really hard to watch all the NBA games because like you can bring up defensive metrics, but they're so inaccurate, especially given today's NBA. If you play on a good team defense, you're going to have good defensive metrics. Now, that doesn't mean you're a good defensive player, but like if you played the OKC Thunder in 2016 and you got to guard Andre Roberson, I'm sure your defensive metrics were elite. That's kind of the problem with defensive metrics at times. But I did want to touch on one thing. I love how you mentioned Draymond, and I think Draymond deserves a lot more consideration for this award because you talked about the impact of just his presence. It's also just his smarts. I mean, the fact that they can actually play him as a small ball five and he competes his butt off and he contests shots really well at the rim without fouling. He's really incredible. I mean, Steph has gotten a ton of credit for the Warriors offense, and as he should. He's been on this incredible run, some of the best shooting maybe we've ever seen, and we've seen a lot of insane shooting from Steph. But what Draymond Green has done for their defense in terms of, I would argue that Draymond Green is what has made Andrew Wiggins play really good defense this year. And Kelly Oubre has played good defense this year because of Draymond Green. So I love that you mentioned him. He's probably not going to win it, but I think he 100% deserves to be right there in the conversation with Gobert and Ben Simmons. And then the other guy is Giannis, who won it last year. And he's not going to win any award this year because even though it's a regular season award, people are going to be talking about his playoff performances. But once again, Giannis has been incredible on the defensive end this year too.
Yeah, and I would just say it seems to be summed up with the two main guys being Gobert and Simmons is if you value versatility on defense or paint protection more. And I think whatever side you go to, either go Simmons or Gobert because they are really close. But it would also be interesting seeing if they had like a stat similar to the Gobert on guards, Simmons on big men, to see if like you could actually crunch the numbers and see if he's really legit when he has switch on those. And one other thing I was curious about is because I too think Draymond Green is a very underrated defender, but do you think that goes into the fact that he is a very outspoken, confident individual that people don't want to give him that much credit because he already kind of takes it himself? Do you think that plays into it at all? Or do you think if he was a little bit more humble, he'd get more credit? How do you guys think about that? I was just thinking about that when you brought it up.
That's a great question, actually. I mean, on one hand, I would like to say that he would get more credit if he's humble, but like then we go NBA seasons without even talking about Kawhi Leonard. I mean, we just talked about Defensive Player of the Year, and once again, Kawhi Leonard he's definitely lost a step on defense. I think last year's playoffs showed it. He's not the Kawhi Leonard of 2014 or 2015 who looked like maybe the best defensive player we've ever seen. Like a Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Scottie Pippen type perimeter defender. But he still should be near this conversation, and we don't talk about him because we forget. And then you talked about with Jokic with MVP. So I don't know how to answer that because I don't even know. I just feel like the NBA media kind of just plays favorites and they drive narratives on reasons. And the reason right now is that Steph is having this incredible year, and that's why the Warriors are succeeding, which is 85% true. And Draymond Green's shooting is so bad that people are just talking about that. But I feel like Draymond Green has had while Steph has been on this run, he's had 10 games in a row where he has 15 assists, 8 rebounds, 8 points, 2 blocks, 3 steals. And the impact he makes defensively, not just by himself, but improving and elevating the defensive players around him, I think that's what separates him. Because Ben Simmons is an incredible individual defender. Ben Simmons doesn't make Matisse Thybulle an incredible defender. Matisse Thybulle is already an incredible defender. Joel Embiid is already an incredible defender. But Draymond Green takes less than parts on defense, and because of his communication and because of how smart he doubles and all of that, he makes them look a lot better. So I didn't answer your question properly. I don't know the answer to your question, but all I'm saying is that I don't know why the NBA media pushes the narratives that it does.
So I guess my thing to that question would be, I think him being outspoken has led to a lot of people calling him an overrated player due to the fact that he cannot really score all that well. And yeah, that is true. People would give the example, if you threw him on the Hornets, how many extra games would they win because of having Draymond Green? And I do think it's a fair point in the fact that, on the offensive end, he is an amazing passer, but playmaking as in scoring for his team, he doesn't really add much there. And I think that's led to a lot of people calling him the most overrated superstar, or people calling him a really, really good elite player. And I think that's led to him being more so underrated than anything, because you insert him on any team and he is instantly one of the best and most elite, I would say, role players. I don't even know if you'd call him a role player, but we haven't seen someone like him, really, I guess, is the point I'm trying to drive home. Like, he's that type where him on the offense and scoring is like, bottom of the barrel, but everything else he does so elite.
Right.
He's not like Dennis Rodman in the sense of how they play, but their impact is like, Dennis Rodman could put up 2 points, but he could also have 20 boards and, play outstanding defense. And that's kind of like what he does, but in a different sense with like passing and stuff,
Yeah, I love that point, because it's like you can't put him on a bad team. And obviously, like, we saw him on the bad team Warriors last year. People thought he was getting exposed, but no, that's not his game. That's not his skill set. But he does make a discernible impact on the court. Like, their superstars, obviously Steph Curry. He's their main primary scorer, and he puts up 30 a night for them. But Draymond Green does a lot of little things, and like, he's the perfect complementary piece for them. And like, okay, you can poo-poo what he would do in a better situation, but you just got to look at his value and what he adds right now. Like, we've seen Steph Curry still put up great numbers when Draymond Green has been hurt at points this year, or Draymond Green didn't play, and the Warriors didn't play good basketball because they miss his playmaking. So like, it's kind of like Steph doesn't need anybody, but Draymond elevates him, and he obviously elevates Draymond in the offensive end. But I agree with you. Like, I don't understand just because you can't put him on if you put him on a bad team, he couldn't average 30. That means he's not a good player. He's incredible at what he does. It's just what he does is more impactful if he has a special scorer like Steph Curry, if he has a special shooter like Klay Thompson.
Yeah, one thing I would just add too before we jump off the topic is I think the communication point you brought up, Blake, is something that not enough people talk about, because you look at both the other guys, and Gobert and Simmons and a lot of the other defenders like Kawhi too, and they're very, very good defenders, but they're not communicating, trying to help the team and making that much of an impact as Draymond does. They obviously still are having conversations in the huddle, having conversations in practice, but I don't see anyone honestly in the NBA who talks more on the court on defense in the game than Draymond Green. And I think that's a super cool aspect of his game, and it's not talked about enough.
And it just goes along with like who he is, and he's very outspoken, obviously, and can lead to some parts where, he berates refs and, borderline harasses them, which is not good, but, he's a very competitive person. And you can obviously tell the defensive impact that he makes. But not to get too off topic here. So we can discuss this. Our predictions are who we would have for our All-NBA first team. Noel, I'm going to go with you again. Who do you have on 2020 All-NBA first team?
So before I get into my team, I'm just saying these are the players I think have been the best over the season. And I didn't factor injury in too much. I think it was really just when they played being the best. So I have Jokic, Steph, Harden, Giannis, and Embiid as my All-NBA first team. That's who I got.
So,
I think do you want to go down, Vish, and say your players? We can see
sure. So I did factor in injury. I picked 4 of the 5 same players as you. But with James Harden, obviously James Harden is an All-NBA first-team player every single season if he plays enough games. He only played 42 games this season, so that's why he's not there. That's why LeBron's not there, obviously. Kyrie, kind of a similar thing, even though he's had like one of the most low-key unbelievable seasons I've seen. He's averaging 27 on basically 50, 40, 90. So what I landed was obviously Steph's a given. Nikola Jokic is a given. Joel Embiid's a given. Giannis. And then I went with Chris Paul, my man CP3. And I went with, just because like Chris Paul's numbers don't jump off the page. I think his impact, like people have talked about it enough, what he did at OKC last year, what he did in Phoenix this year. But the other thing with Chris Paul that is really, really special to me, and it just talks about what a great point guard he is the fact that he's averaging just 2.2 turnovers a game and 9 assists a game. That's unbelievable ball handling, distribution, efficiency. You don't really see that in the NBA anymore. Like Russ averages like 11 assists, but Russ also gives you 5 turnovers. James Harden can give you like 12 assists a season, but he'll average 6 turnovers a game. And Chris Paul's ability to take care of the basketball, always make the right play, be a good defensive player. I think he deserved that spot. His efficiency is always great. And so I went with Steph, Chris Paul, obviously Giannis, obviously Nikola Jokic, obviously Joel Embiid.
Okay. Good lists. I think I'm more closer to Nolan's list than anyone. So I had Stephen Curry, James Harden, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, and Embiid. So I just wanted to hit on two guys. So Harden, I have him there. I think MVP and Defense Player of the Year, like injuries are very important for those because I think that's more of a year-long award when you're fighting with literally everyone else in the league. But when you're fighting amongst the best of the best, I'm looking at pure talent and just who I want on my team. I want this guy or I want this guy. And for me, James Harden is out of any shooting guard, or you can even label point guard. I don't know if there's a guy who I would rather take over. I think Steph and Harden, guard-wise, have been definitely the top two. Harden's definitely missed a lot of games, but when he's been in there, it's really incredible seeing his impact. And everyone's like, oh, the Nets team is so loaded, this and that. Well, what about when KD's missed a lot of the time? Because he hasn't been there very much. Kyrie's missed a lot of games. And then there was one stretch of the season where when he was playing without them and their next best guy was Joe Harris, and he was just – it didn't matter the center who was there because that person was getting 15 points just off of dunks and layups alone from Harden. He elevates everyone so much. It's actually ridiculous. I think the only other guy where I watch him play and just ball handle and elevates like the wings and just makes them look better than they are is LeBron. I think LeBron and Harden are probably the best two in the league at doing that. And what Harden has done this year is nothing short of spectacular. I mean, people in the media are talking about Bruce Brown as a key guy, and you're like, oh, he's scoring a lot of points here and there, and his defensive impact, and you're like, wow, a lot of these shots are wide open. How is that? How is that with Joe Harris? How is that with Landry Shamet? And it's just Harden being the man. So that's why I have him there. I don't think many are more impactful than he is. And then Giannis, I wanted to bring him up too. So obviously the playoff woes, reason no one is thinking about him for award, but I really think this is the best season he's had, even compared amongst his peers and just overall. Like if there was a season to win MVP for him, you could argue this season he's at a better case than in the last few, just of how good he has been. And I don't think people are really talking about just because, oh, they lost to the Heat last year, and oh, they got bounced in the playoffs 2 years ago. So it's a shame because these awards are regular season for 2021, not 2019 postseason, and those shouldn't factor in at all. But they do because just narratives by the media, I think. So I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I love that. And obviously, I don't have James Harden on my list. And him, LeBron, same reason, right? James Harden's played 42 games. LeBron's played 43. They can't make it for me because of that reason. I understand your reasoning, but for me, like the guys who played the entire season are closer. I mean, obviously, Embiid's been out too, deserve it just a bit more. But in terms of James Harden, I think it needs to be emphasized more that when he was playing without KD and Kyrie, there was no Blake Griffin. There was no LaMarcus Aldridge before he had, God bless him, that health condition. Hopefully he gets better, but there was no LaMarcus Aldridge. It was James Harden. Wasn't DeAndre Jordan hurt for a period too? It was James Harden, Bruce Brown, Joe Harris, Jeff Green, and I don't even know who their fifth starter was. They would trot that. Yeah, and they were playing Tyler.
Been banged up though a little bit too. Like everybody's been banged up for that team.
Yeah, they were playing Luwawu. They were playing Luwawu Cabarro big minutes, and it didn't matter because they would beat playoff teams, and they would be scoring 145 because James Harden is maybe the single most all-around impactful offensive player in the NBA. Just in terms of what he does as a ball handler, it's incredible. So he 100% deserves that credit. For me, it was just that games. And then I love that you brought up Giannis because, yeah, Giannis has been, like, amazing this year. And especially the last 2 months, Giannis has fixed his free throw shooting a little bit. His free throw shooting was, like, 60% at the beginning of this year. And now he's gotten it near 70%. He's gotten a bit more consistent there. And he's actually been a little wet with his three ball. His three ball has been I mean, Giannis has never been a good shooter, but by Giannis standards, he's been shooting the three ball pretty well the last month or so. So he definitely should be in this conversation. Obviously, he stuffs the stat sheet like no other. Geez, say that 3 times fast. But he definitely deserves to be in the conversation too.
Yeah, I think just an interesting thing with the conversation because of the discrepancy between our lists. So we have Harden versus CP3 in terms of the only differences in our list. And I think it just brings up a very curious, like, 2 ways where CP3 has been kind of game in, game out, delivering every single time he's been in. But his stat sheet numbers aren't, I would say, as impressive as when Harden was in the stretch. So just a matter of how much you'd value Harden's brief, like, greatness of a stretch versus CP3's day in, day out consistency. It's just an interesting factor for this. But I do think that with these awards and kind of how you're talking about Giannis, I think there are some just parts of not including the playoffs that just is tough because then injuries come into play. And then you have a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's, like you guys said, having arguably his best season that he's had, but he's already won 2 MVPs. Like, does that say, I don't know, the whole process is a little bit flawed? I just think there's a little bit too much gray area, but it brings up some interesting, like, opinionated differences. So it is
the process is screwed up. The process is 100% screwed up. Like, take Giannis's, I want to say his first MVP, for example, right? He was the new guy on the block. The Bucks were good. So, like, he won the MVP. James Harden averaged 36 points a game that season. James Harden had the Rockets as a 4 seed when they were playing Kenneth Faried and Austin Rivers 30 minutes a game. Think about that. Kenneth Faried, for a month in the NBA season after not playing for basically a year with the Denver Nuggets, he signs for the vet minimum with the Houston Rockets, and James Harden's having him average 15 and 11 over a month. And James Harden basically didn't win it. Why? Because the Houston Rockets missed 27 straight threes in Game 7 against the Warriors the year before, and the media was just holding that against him. So James Harden couldn't win MVP because of that, and Giannis is the new guy on the block and all that. Now, fast forward 2 years, and kind of the same thing is happening to Giannis. He should be right there for the MVP conversation right now. And they stress so much how this is a regular season award, but, like, I mean, Derrick Rose won it in the same fashion. Like, we're all from Chicago. Derrick Rose was unbelievable that season. You can't tell me LeBron wasn't the MVP in 2011, but nobody wanted to give it to him after he moved to the Heat. So, like, there's too many preconceived narratives that go into these awards, and it's unfortunate. But I'm glad that we brought up Giannis because he should be probably, I feel like we didn't even talk about him enough in the MVP topic. But, like, if it's Jokic is 1, Giannis is probably 2. In my opinion, he should be higher than CP3 or Steph or the other guys.
Interesting. And I did want to say here, so the Jazz don't have any guys who are on our first team. And they've been, I mean, one of the best teams in the West. They've held the best record in the league for a really long time. Do you guys think Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert? I would say more Donovan Mitchell. I think it'd be tough to put in Rudy Gobert over those 2 centers. But do you think either of these guys should be getting more talk for first team in the fact that their team is a top 2 seed or 3 seed in the West?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. I think definitely some consideration, but with the talent pool of the NBA and looking at the only guy I see who really with the most potential is Spida Mitchell. And with the talent pool of the NBA, him, yeah, as good as he is, but going up against guys who've been playing nearly out of their mind, like Steph and Hardin and even CP3, I kind of give all those guys the nudge over Donovan Mitchell as good as he's been. And I really think the success of the Jazz has been just more of accumulation of the team, having, like, arguably the best defensive anchor, having an elite scorer in Mitchell. And then I would say also the threesome of the role players in the man Jingles, Bogdanovich, and Mike Conley are a very underrated, like, kind of, I wouldn't say big 3. I might maybe even say small 3 because they're not the best players, but they're very elite role players, very smart and know what they're doing. So I would say elite success is more their team versus, like, individual talent.
Yeah, I agree with that. To me, Spida and Rudy Gobert probably both make all NBA second team. I mean, I considered Spida over CP3. Again, I talked about the injuries thing. Spida's only played 53 games. CP3 has played 67. So I gave the nod to CP3. Joel Embiid is the only guy who's played, I think, 49 games that I put in there just because I feel like as a big and with Philly being the 1 seed, it was just a little overwhelming as a push for Joel Embiid. But in terms of the Jazz awards, I will say this. I think Jordan Clarkson's going to win Sixth Man of the Year. So there's one award that I think the Jazz will win. And you mentioned the small three. I would say it's a small four because Jordan Clarkson's incredible off the bench. He lights it up every single night. And then the other person I want to mention, and we're going to do our defensive all-NBA defensive team after this, and obviously Rudy Gobert is going to be in there, is that Royce O'Neal has been an incredible defensive player for them this year. And I did consider him for the all-defensive team. I went with kind of an unorthodox list, and he wasn't there. But again, just another guy that deserves a shout-out that I think should be somewhere in the conversation for the All-NBA awards.
No, definitely. I was just curious because, you don't really hear about – it's tough seeing a team like the Jazz, as good as they have been. They probably won't have a guy on the first team All-NBA. I think about that. I think it was 2014 Hawks team that they had like 5 All-Stars. I don't think any of them made the All-NBA first team, but they were just more of like kind of like you guys have been saying, like a really well-rounded team that's just accumulation of talent as opposed to 1 or 2 guys who are just top 5, 6 NBA players. But it's an interesting thought. But we can go on to this. All NBA defensive first team. So we're only going to do the first team. Defensive second team, it's a lot of names. We don't want to get into it. We just want to talk about our 5 top guys. Noel, who is your all NBA defensive first team?
All right, yeah. So who I got in my defensive team, starting it off with Gobert. We talked about a lot in this video. I got the man Draymond in there. I got Ben Simmons. I got Miles Turner in there. And then I got the man who takes anyone he goes up to or goes up against to the chamber, Lou Dort, the Dortcher chamber. We're repping today. We're repping, always repping. My man Lou Dort, he's in there for sure. And those are my 5 then. What about you guys?
Yeah, I think that's an incredible list. I actually went a little bit positionless, and I just picked what I think are the 5 best defensive players. Also, shout out to Miles Turner. That's an incredible name. He's had an awesome defensive season for the Indiana Pacers. But he didn't make my team. So I like you went Ben Simmons. I have Rudy Gobert in there. I had to put Giannis Antetokounmpo in there. Obviously, he's been incredible. And then my other 2 spots, I went with Joel Embiid and Draymond Green. I still think Joel Embiid's had an incredible defensive season. Again, I feel like a little bit of a hypocrite because he's the one guy that seems to get the pass with me when it comes to games played. But I think the basketball from him this season has just been so dominant when he has played. And Philly has been so good that when he plays that, like when you're the 1 seed and stuff, I feel like you just get a little bit of a pass with the award system compared to the other teams.
Interesting. So my list is a little different, but Nolan, I want to bring up Lou Dort that you mentioned him because that's a name I don't have, but I'm happy you brought him up because as I mentioned, I think James Harden is first team All-NBA. I think he's maybe the best playmaker in the league right now. I've never seen anyone guard him as well as Lou Dort guarded him for the Thunder last year. I had never seen anything like it. He is big enough to, take shots where he's like trying to drive and push him back. He's quick enough to get to him at the spot that he's trying to get to at the same time. He plays with his hands by his side, doesn't, get baited into a foul. And that was one of the most impressive defensive performances that first round last year, the Rockets Thunder, by Lou Dort. So the fact that you mentioned him, I think, speaks volume to him as a guy. And obviously, the Dortcher chamber, you don't really get much better of a defensive nickname than that. But so for my awards, I went my NBA defense first team awards. I went more like just positions. So I only had 1 center, but I'll start with point guard. So I had Ben Simmons. Not much more I need to say on him. Obviously, he's in the top of contention. My second guy, though, is going to be a guy neither of you mentioned, and that is Kawhi Leonard. who I still think he's locked down. We don't talk about him because he might be part robot and he's just a cyborg. He's locked down on defense, though. Doesn't show much emotions, but I still, in the clutchest of clutch times and with the lights the brightest, and I need a defensive stop, I want him on my team because he will make it happen. At my small forward position, I had Giannis Antetokounmpo, Defense Player of the Year last year. Amazing on defense again, perimeter and in the paint. Awesome defender. Number 4 was another guy I mentioned earlier, Draymond Green, who, I mean, he does it all. You slot him into any team, and their defense just instantly gets so much better. Just their team defense, not even the position that he's replacing. So I have to have him there. And then number 5 is Rudy Gobert, the center. This was tough for me because, obviously Embiid's insanely good on defense too, but Gobert's defense is just a teensy bit of a notch better. And that's where I would have him in there.
Yeah, Kawhi is a great call. And then obviously you do got to shout out Lu Dort, just another guy that could have been in the most improved player conversation because his offense is a lot better than what I gave it credit for. He's not Andre Roberson, who, as Stephen A. Smith says, his offense is offensive. He's viable on the offensive end. But the one thing I would say with Lu Dort, too, you touched on James Harden, right? The one thing that makes Dort unique is the most underrated thing about James Harden offensively to me is his strength. Like, not many people can take his body. Like, people don't realize James Harden's a 230-pound man, and he really lowers his shoulder into people, and he creates space with his body as well as anybody. I would say maybe Kawhi Leonard in 2017, 2016 was the only guy who could really move with Harden, but also take his body contact because he was so strong. But Harden isn't the same player he was then. And obviously, Kawhi's knees have made him slow down just a little bit on the defensive end. But Lu Dort is unique from that sense, and he's obviously a phenomenal defender, especially specifically for James Harden. But yeah, I mean, the center position I think is tough, honestly, this year because Nolan mentioned Miles Turner and Rudy Gobert. I mentioned Embiid and Gobert, and then you mentioned just Gobert. But like the thing is, I would say all 3 of those guys have played at an All-NBA first-team defense level when they've played. So it's really tough to decipher.
Mm-hmm. Another name you could throw in there too, Noel, is Jakob Poeltl. Anyone? I know he's been mentioned before. Awesome center defensively.
He fell off a little bit.
Yeah, my man Jakob. Last video, he was leading the Raptors statistic. He was having a season, blocking everyone. No one could get in the paint. Had a slight fall off. It might be correlated to the fact that he shoots 34% from the line. He's not really helping himself out from the offensive side of things. But I love my man Jakob. All praise to that man. But when I look at my list, I see 2 guys who I maybe took some stretches on. There's a little bit more proven guys. So I didn't have Giannis and I didn't have Kawhi, who are very proven. I took some risks having Miles Turner and Dort, so I'll give some brief rationales for that. With Dort, we've already talked on him a little bit. I think he's a phenomenal defender, one of my favorite players in the entire league. And one thing, the reason I basically fell in love with watching the man play the game of basketball is I don't see anyone – I don't think I've ever seen anyone use as much intensity on the defensive side of the ball as Lu Dort brings. He gets around screens. It's an art form watching him get around screens. So many players who are great defenders can just easily fall victim to a good screen, a good hard screen. And Lu Dort scrambles around there faster than a greyhound on a racetrack. Like, I don't know. It's a work of art. It's legit. And then with Miles Turner, we talked so much about Gobert and the defensive player of the year and just him in general being a defensive anchor. But I think Miles Turner is the definition of a defensive anchor. Watching any person go into the paint when Miles Turner's there, it's almost like if you're betting, you're going to bet there's going to be a shot block. It's a work of art watching him work down there, and he blocks nearly anyone who comes down there. I think he's a man who doesn't get enough praise. The Pacers kind of have they're a fringer team right now. They kind of got to figure some stuff out to really be a contender. So I think they don't have that big of a market, so not many people watch him. But Miles Turner is very legit, and I think even if he's not on the list, he deserves to be in this conversation.
Interesting. My only thing against Miles Turner is one guy who's kind of given him the work is Embiid. Embiid historically against Miles Turner's he's kind of killed him a little bit a few times, but that's pretty nitpicky, and it's Joel Embiid. So obviously the greats are going to beat the greats at some point or another. So, but yeah, overall, I love the torture chamber. And then Miles Turner. I think it was a few of the first games of the year. The dude, he had like over 5 blocks, like a stretch of that for like multiple games. Which is just dumbfounding. And yeah, as you were mentioning, like if you go in the paint, you're kind of expecting a block with him in there. But any more thoughts?
All good.
No, I think I'm good.
Welcome to it. Always remember.
That wraps it up for the All-NBA Defensive First Team. Drop a comment what you guys had, and we will be back with a NBA stream in the near future, hopefully discussing the playoffs and why the playing games are good and hopefully really exciting. I think they will be. And maybe some predictions. Maybe we'll do a little bracket for who we have winning. All I know is I know Nolan doesn't have the Nets winning. Nolan's a big Knicks guy, so he'll probably have Knicks.
The real team in New York. The real team.
They really are. They really are. They don't get talked about enough though. So look out for that.
Hey, the Mecca.
And, it is the Mecca. I mean, the Nets don't want to go to They don't want to go to New York in the Mecca. They just don't. But that'll wrap up this one. Thanks for watching.